In the land where I was born, there are now women seeking justice. Justice for birth mothers. Oh Lord, hear my prayer.
Thank you for joining us in the latest of our Justice for Birth Mothers podcast series. And in this podcast, I'm joined by Natalie Anderson, who's the co-founder of Family Court Crisis, which is a UK-based advocacy group for mothers in difficulties with the family courts. Natalie, thank you for joining me in this podcast.
Thank you very much indeed for having me. It's a real pleasure to speak with you.
Natalie, maybe we could begin by you telling me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I was born and grew up in the United Kingdom. My mother's Bosnian. She grew up in the former Yugoslavia and came over to Britain in the 1960s. And as I was growing up, I maintained contact with family in Yugoslavia as it was then. I enjoyed spending summer holidays there. And as I grew up, I sort of felt I had an affinity, with Slavic languages and literature. So I ended up going to university, studying Russian and Czech, and then my journey took me abroad. I worked in the Czech Republic for a couple of years, and then felt, well, while I'm still young enough, I'd like to spend time in other countries too, and had a look around the region. I've had family in Serbia as well, friends in Hungary, but I sort of alighted in Croatia and was working there, but that was very difficult. It's one of those countries where it's really hard to find work. The employment market then was really poor. I'm not sure if it's changed that much. So I was sort of thinking about heading back, and then I met a man who had been sort of through similar difficulties to me. And we ended up getting married and having children. And then I'd been lucky enough to find work when the children, just after I found out I was pregnant, actually. But then when they were 2 years old, I was made redundant, one of a series of redundancies, and which were interspersed by periods of long-term unemployment. So we left, we came to Britain, and that was a good decision for other reasons, because, for example, my parents are here. When you've got small children, you need that village around you. And I realized how isolated I'd been. And for a mother with very young children, isolation is very, very hard. So I found that I had my old network of friends. It was wonderful to be invited out again and, feel that you have a life, together with your family, that involved the whole family, because those friends who had small children as well. And of course, the employment opportunities and educational opportunities. But unfortunately, he decided he was not happy. And that culminated with him telling me that he needed a holiday, taking the children abroad and not bringing them back. So that's what threw me into a Hague child abduction case and the family courts. I believed that what I was experiencing was because of being in Croatia. I actually won my Hague case initially. And I think that might have been a reflection of the fact that at that time, that was 2016, the family court model, as we know it in the Western world, had not yet been firmly embedded into Croatia. And actually something my lawyer at the time told me suggested that, Croatia was still a sort of pro-mother jurisdiction. But I think exactly around that time, things may have started to change. Croatia, if you look on the EU website now, there's something called the Justice Scoreboard. Croatia has been at the bottom for several years now, below countries like Hungary and Poland, which are always the subject of criticism, at the EU level, because of the rule of law. But nobody talks about Croatia. So I sort of assumed that the things that I was seeing which were horrifying. I realized that my children and I had absolutely no protection under the law. And that's a terrifying feeling when you think that the laws are there, you know, that it works, I knew that the court system in Croatia was, you know, imperfect, but I thought to myself, surely when it comes to children's matters, corruption could not touch those. But I was wrong. Entirely the opposite is true. I believe that children's matters are especially vulnerable to corruption. I know it's very difficult to talk about corruption. People have trouble believing it, but I believe that there is so much evidence around now that it's absolutely possible to, you know, speak about that, including in the public domain. And not only, you know, is that happening in Croatia, I realized after coming to the UK with my children to try to escape that situation, that the same was happening here, the same was happening in the United States, in Ireland, across the European Union, Australia, Canada, South Africa, etc. That it's a worldwide problem. So that's what made me start up Family Court Crisis, to try to map the problems, you know, sort of across nations and across the globe, and also to act as a sort of central point where people can find out information about what's happening, and where a group under which mothers, families can unite to advocate for their rights as citizens.
My children have been taken by the force of law and order in Ireland, Holy Ireland. Justice for birth mothers, oh Lord, hear my prayer.
Natalie, you now have a very wonderful insight into what is literally happening across the globe in the family courts. What's the commonality?
So I believe the commonality is a professional body called the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts, or the AFCC. That started to grow up I think it was founded in the 1960s in California. And they've developed a sort of set of models and protocols for use in family law cases. And embedded into their ideology are the teachings of Richard Gardner, the founder of parental alienation syndrome. So that's another one of those highly contested, you know, what many people refer to as pseudo-scientific theories, like false memory syndrome, like Munchausen syndrome by proxy, and other, you know, let's say psychiatric phenomena, which are used to undermine the mental health of usually women, to discredit them in legal cases, and in the case of the family courts, you know, to effect the transfer of custody from the mother to the abusive parent. That's a model which it seems to have spread worldwide, almost like a sort of franchise scheme. You know, I believe it probably went initially across the border into Canada, then to other English-speaking countries, into Britain because of our special relationship with the United States. This is very much related with trade. It's a professional body. The divorce and child custody industry is worth billions of pounds in the United States alone. And I believe, this is what I was told by a very, very good group of advocates in Canada as well, that when states in Canada started to realize how lucrative this could be, that they, you know, grasped onto it eagerly, and that the same has happened, you know, now also across the European Union. You know, these people are adept at lobbying. There's also a lot of propaganda that goes on. So I'm in touch with mothers in Japan right now who are sending us links to media resources which show how, I believe from Australia, because there's an Asia Pacific branch of the AFCC, they're trying to portray Japanese mothers as kidnappers, as alienators, and say, oh, it's absolutely necessary that Japan must institute 50-50 child custody. Now, I think people make a mistake of thinking that, well, oh, we have equality laws nowadays, the 50-50 child custody, that means shared equally between the parents. That must be a good thing that upholds equality. but there is no equality when it comes to motherhood. It's mothers who, gestate and carry children who generally bear the majority of the burden of childcare and who are intricately psychologically and biologically linked with their children. 50-50 child custody is not a child-friendly model because it really treats a child as an asset from a marriage who's to be split equally down the middle. I believe if you look at children and what that does to them when you're asking them to split their lives between two homes, that it's not a harmonious and stable way of living. I believe there's been a lot of tainted research which tries to portray this as wonderful for children, but a lot of that again is propaganda. Nowadays we're seeing in the field of research, academic research, a lot of prepaid outcomes, research which is commissioned to make a particular finding, and it will. And this has really undermined decades of research into the crucial mother-child bond, how important that is for children in their development and what that means for them as adults. So to cut a long story short, it's entirely profit driven. There are scores of different kinds of experts and professionals who make a lot of money from family law, starting with lawyers through expert witnesses, mental health experts, guardians ad litem, etc., etc. This is not about children. This is about making money.
Motherhood is hard, support the mother and the child together. Do not tear this love asunder. Support, respect the mother. Justice for birth mothers. Oh Lord, hear my prayer.
I can resonate with everything that you're saying from my experience of talking to mothers here in Ireland. For example, yesterday afternoon, I had a phone call from a mother who has just been presented with a bill for €56,000 by a solicitor for dealing with a family court matter. And in fact, in the past, I have spoken to mothers who have paid out tens of thousands of euro to be represented in the family courts when they come up against Tusla. And in some cases, this goes beyond €100,000. And I suppose all of this then is facilitated by the in-camera rule, which makes it a jailing offence if you speak outside of the family court about what has transpired in the family court. And I believe that in the UK, particularly in Wales and in England, the in-camera rule has recently been lifted.
I think that might be putting it a little bit too strongly or optimistically. As far as I'm aware, it's still limited to a number of courts where it's been piloted. I think it might have been expanded recently, but again, I think that it might be restricted to legal bloggers who must be qualified lawyers, and to journalists who have a press card. So it's not as if it's easy to access those hearings, as a member of the public. I did try recently to support a mother. I didn't succeed. I don't know, there might have been another reason for that, but there is a problem. There's a lack of journalists who are covering this, and with the best will in the world, the ones who are to date covering it, who have the required expertise, struggle, I think they're overwhelmed. Their inboxes are full with, people asking for their assistance by attending the hearings. And it's also very difficult. I think that there are still legal battles in being able to access and report on those cases. I also joined a project called Open Justice Court of Protection. So I think the Court of Protection, it's a similar body. It deals more with deprivation of liberty and, when people lack capacity, so it's dealing with medical decisions on, the care of, people in that situation. There is a little bit ahead, so any member of the public can join those hearings, but there are still sort of administrative battles with actually being able to identify the hearings, get access to them, because in Britain, our court system is desperately underfunded, and I think that administrative staff struggle to deal with requests to access hearings, but it does seem like, some judges are also not really acting in the spirit, of open justice and, sometimes making, reporting restriction orders, which, so it's not like it's all, we've reached the sunny uplands of transparency in the family courts yet, but, hopefully we're getting closer to it and it will help, I believe, yeah.
Look into your mother's face. No one else can take her place. Justice for birth mothers, oh Lord, hear my prayer.
Just picking up on some of the points that you've made there, what's really coming across to me is that in your experience and from your observations, there is a strong bias against women and mothers in the family courts.
I believe there is bias against on absolutely every ground that you can make bias on. My cases were to do with child abduction and child custody, but I'm aware that there's also what's called the public law side of things, which is about putting children into care, into adoption and the fostering system. There especially, but also in the sort of child custody and abduction side, I believe that people who, may suffer discrimination on the basis of race, on the basis of disability, on their socioeconomic status, but it seems to work against you whichever way you look at it. So we had a little discussion yesterday among some mothers, is it better to try to portray yourself as a highly educated and intelligent mother, or, because, are the, court professionals, are they snobs? Do they look down on people who they perceive as being unintelligent? No, I believe both are true. I believe that they actually also hate intelligent, articulate women. I've been a victim of that. I was told I was so, my presentation, of my case was so compelling that I was clearly indoctrinating my children. So you can't win. If you're wealthy, then, you couldn't possibly be a victim of abuse. You're undeserving of justice, So I think, a lot of this tends to impact women disproportionately because it is, I believe, disproportionately women who are the victims of, domestic abuse and sexual violence, and who are trying to protect their children from those phenomena. And the way the system is set up is that it rewards the abuser and it drags out the case instead of resolving it. So it's almost like I see them dangling the child, as the sort of, carrot, come and get it, just pay more, legal fees, expert witness reports, etc., etc. I believe that's why they won't simply resolve abuse cases satisfactorily. And that is true also if you're a man. So I have come across at least one man who has had an extremely abusive ex-partner, who has ample evidence, that she is abusing the child, that she is unsafe. She may also, be engaging in criminal activities, but the court will reward her, and has also cast him as, having psychiatric problems, etc., etc. So, yeah, I don't know quite how to put it, but yeah, there are some people who will say, that this absolutely bigoted and discriminatory mindset that you come across in the family court is as a result of like patriarchal, attitudes. that may be, but I think it's more than that. I think it's about greed and money and just, nasty people. I don't know if I'm, maybe being too vague there. Yeah.
My children have been taken by the force of law and order in Ireland, holy Ireland. Justice for birth mothers, oh Lord, hear my prayer.
Sometimes sociopaths actually can make it to the top and hold very important positions.
Mm-hmm. Yes. There might be something as well about the policies, the training, because I believe that people who come into this system and then, are trained in family law, are trained in social work, people in Tusla and CAFCASS in the UK, the equivalent, everything that they learn is steeped in this ideology, which is very critical. It's not looking at people with compassion. It seems to be very much about parent blaming and judging and things. And so I think that might also be a factor, just to be fair. Maybe it's not just about nasty, but I definitely pick up on your point about sociopaths, because I have witnessed and heard about, behaviors which are so extreme. It feels like people are actually enjoying seeing people suffer, enjoying exerting power over people and seeing them cry, seeing them almost vomit with distress and showing absolutely no compassion.
That's kind of psychopathic behavior.
Yeah.
And Debbie McCann, in a report in the Mail on Sunday, recently interviewed a number of mothers who have fallen foul of this concept of parental alienation, which you mentioned earlier, in the family courts here in Ireland. And mothers have been advised by their legal teams not to mention the fact that they are victims of domestic violence or that their children are victims of sexual abuse when they are appearing before a judge in the family court, because they will be seen as an alienator. And so it's best not to mention this. So really, we have a very, very sick system of state abuse of mothers and children. And the general public think that the state abuse of mothers and children ended with the closure of the last mother and baby homes. But in actual fact, there is an unbroken chain of state abuse of mothers and children that continues to the present day. And here in Ireland, the agents of that abuse are Tusla, the family courts, and to a much lesser extent, the Gardaí. In the UK, it would appear that CAFCASS, which is the equivalent to our Tusla, and your family courts are, I suppose, the authors of state abuse of mothers and children, the same way as it's happening here in Ireland.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I can't remember when I first started to draw parallels, but in the early part of this year, 2024, I became aware of an exhibition in London at the London Irish Centre about the mother and baby homes. It was an exhibition of photography, and there was a film, Margot Harkin's Stolen, which was screened. So I spent a couple of days at the exhibition watching the screening. I met the author of the photographs, the photo exhibition, who's published a book as well. At the beginning of the year, I also put on what I called a community unconference on the family courts, because I wanted to try to bring ownership of the problem into the hands of the victims. There's too much discourse at the level of lawyers, professionals, NGOs, MPs over the heads of the mothers. And I feel that we need to be having the discussions that we feel we need to be having about the topics that we wanted to talk about. So, for example, I wanted to make space about for people to talk about, child sexual abuse, even to the point where, there are people who have reported satanic ritual abuse. Now, this sounds really extreme, but there was a case of a little boy called Thomas Valver in, I believe it was New York State, who I believe it was in 2023. I think his father and his new partner were found guilty of Thomas Valver's murder. His mother had been begging the court that the child was being abused. What she describes is ritualistic abuse, and they ignored her, they mocked her, they vilified her, they took her child, and he died in very distressing circumstances. So I don't believe it is right to simply shut people out and not allow their stories to enter the discourse just because they happen to be too extreme that we can't contemplate that it can happen. Personally, things that I have seen, and heard, experienced, make me feel that we have to understand that there is almost no lower depth to the depravity to which people can sink to. And this is very much about child abuse. And I believe at this point in time, it's pretty much endemic. So there was also a session about the mother and baby homes, which featured a gentleman who had been boarded out into foster care in Ireland. And he and his 3 brothers suffered the most appalling abuse in foster care. So I don't know why people have difficulty believing that children are abused in care settings, because there is a long historical precedent for this. And also there's a very, good body of evidence about is the severe impact that this has on children and what it means for their lives as they're growing up. So this gentleman, his 2 brothers had committed suicide, both of them. We know that many children who enter the care system, when they leave it, enter the criminal justice system. I've been told that as many as 85% of people in prisons are care experienced. So why are we doing this to children? And I found among the victims of the mother and baby homes and the campaigners who are supporting them a great deal of understanding for my, let's say, assertion that the family courts is just another instance of the same phenomenon repeating again. It is a form of child trafficking. It is institutional child trafficking. There is, that is a known phenomenon. It does happen. Just people have difficulty in getting it into their heads that this can be happening in our courts, these bodies which we think are esteemed, renowned institutions, in the British justice system, which we thought was the best in the world. No, it's happening, and so, I was just very grateful to find solidarity with the mother and baby home victims. I'm very concerned that they're still battling for redress and that there are people who are excluded, from that the process of the commission maybe was set up exactly to do that. That's very disappointing. We must learn from that, and I believe that we need to stand in solidarity. So victims of all of these instances where children are being trafficked from their mothers, abused by the state, and abuse of their mothers too, and fathers, there are loving fathers who, and for, wider family members who are impacted by this too. We need to stand together and say to the government, enough is enough. This must not be allowed to continue a day further. We need to stop it. We need to radically rethink, the way that we're treating families. I don't think it's just about transparency, and we need to demand redress. There are children right now who need to be reunited with their mothers, including mine.
Well, Natalie, that is a note on which to end, in that you have said enough is enough. Enough is enough here in Ireland, enough is enough in the UK, and indeed across the globe. We need to all come together to call for an end to state abuse of mothers and children. Thank you for joining me in this podcast.
Thank you so much, Anna.
Justice for Birth Mothers is a co-production between the Alliance of Birth Mothers Campaigning for Justice and 𝐸 Media. The podcast series received no funding and is made possible by a team of volunteers. Thank you for listening, and please share this podcast with your family, friends and contacts. Until next time, 𝐵𝑖𝑟𝑡ℎ 𝐀𝐼𝐴.
In the land where I was born, there are now women seeking justice. Justice for birth mothers, oh Lord,